Hi everyone, welcome back to our second video slash episode slash session. So my name is Kyle, pronouns he, they. I'm one of the advocacy chair for Masu ECC this year. Um, and yeah, I want to get away.
Hello, my name is Jane Elliston. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a co-public relations chair. Sam's got it.
Hello, my name is Sam Bosley. He, him, his. I am the technical networking chair for Masu.
Yes, thank you all. And so for this week, we are reading an article that Jane found. It's called A Model of Intersectional Stress and Trauma in Asian American Sexual and Gender Minorities. Um, we had a lot of different takeaways from it. Just lots of new terms that we found out and stuff like that. But we will have a list of questions and we will go through it discussion style like last time if you watched the last. Yeah. We can just go ahead and start asking questions. So the first question on the list is, how do you understand intersectional stress from what you are able to read?
Can we backtrack?
Yes. You can start with what.
Do you want to explain what minority stress and intersectional stress means first, I guess?
Yeah, we should probably preface that. Sam, do you want to? You're the expert on minorities. See, do you want to
He
explain?
outsourced resources.
I guess I can, since I'm the minority expert here. So yeah, just to go over this, there actually is an established theory called the minority stress theory. You can find it on Wikipedia, and it has 3 tenets that it goes by, and it's kind of like a generalization of how minorities become stressed. So the first tenet is minority status leads to increased exposure to distal stressors. The second one is minority stress leads to increased exposure to proximal stressors due to distal stressors. And then the third one is minority individuals suffer adverse health outcomes, which are caused by exposure to proximal and distal stressors. So the tenets kind of build on each other. So essentially it's saying if 1 happens, then 2 will probably happen, and then 3 happens as the result of the combination of 1 and 2. And what 1 is saying is we have these distal stressors, and what that means is stressors due to external influences. So this would be things such as racism, homophobia, just things that you see in the media, microaggressions. External meaning stressors that are outside of your, I guess, sphere or bubble of people that you associate with. The second one is saying that we have proximal stressors due to distal stressors. So, and this is specifically talking to intersectionality of the Asian American identity and the LGBTQ identity in this case. But let's say you experience a microaggression because of you being in both of those identities. And what this tenet is saying is that you will experience stressors from people close to you because you can't open up to them. So it's hard to talk to your family about the intersectionality of both of these things because maybe they're Asian American, but they're not LGBTQ. Or maybe your friends are LGBTQ, but they're not Asian American. And so it's kind of hard to open up about these things. So then in combination to the external stressors, you also have these domestic stressors or these stressors from people that are closest to you. And then the third tenet is just saying the combination of these two essentially make up minority stress and can cause adverse health problems. So that's like a brief brief as can be summary of the minority stress theory as it stands on Wikipedia.
Cam gave us the Spark Notes edition.
Always appreciate Spark Note. So yeah, I guess like from those definitions, how are you able to understand like those theories? Like how do you kind of put it into example in your own way of seeing, if that makes sense?
I can start. I guess like from what I've understood like in the last like 20 or so minutes is like kind of makes me think of my intersectional experience as like someone that is multiracial. And so like um if I'm like for example like in the US, right? I would get like the microaggressions, the stereotypes of being like Asian American. People would be like, "Oh, you must be smarter. You have to like do good grades." Like that's the first stereotypes that come to mind, but like they say that. And then like I feel like it's like really stressful. It's kind of like frustrating because like that's obviously not the case, you know, like there's stereotypes, or generalizations. But then when it comes to like going to talk to my parents about it, like my mom's an immigrant from Japan, like she doesn't understand the experience of being an Asian American or like even growing up in the US, you know? Or my dad is a white American. And so he has grown up in the US, but he, as a white man, will never understand the oppressions that I face. And so I just like feel like I don't really have a place to speak to them about these situations, or like even if I do, like it's even more frustrating for me because they don't understand what I'm coming from. And so it just leads to me not saying anything. But then I end up bottling up all these stress, all the stress, all these frustrations, and it leads to like my depression, my anxiety, like all the different things that I go to a therapist for, you know? That was kind of my understanding of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to say I resonate with that. I also come from a mixed background. My dad is white and American, and then my mom is Taiwanese. And I kind of get what you're saying. Like applying the minority stress theory to my life, I kind of get what they mean when they say that there's not really, at least with the second tenet where it's talking about proximal stressors, there's not really a place where you can go to talk to someone about it, because all the people that I generally talk to, I mean, so like, for example, my parents or like my family, um, they're only involved in one of those identities. So either my friends are white or they're Asian American, and it's hard to find someone who understands both of those things combined, because it's a very different experience for um, a full Asian American to grow up in America versus a mixed Asian American to grow up in America, you know. Um, and like even then, like when you grow up, when you live in America as a mixed Asian, only the Asian side is seen from you. But if you visit, so like for example, if I were to visit Taiwan, people would only see the white side of you, and so
I
it's like
totally get that.
yeah, you can't ever find like a place where like people actually see both sides of you, you know.
Hmm.
So I totally get what this is saying
Yeah.
about like stress.
I think like what y'all said, it makes sense. Like it helped me make, or it helped me make sense in, or it helps me understand this better too. Like just hearing from what y'all said. Definitely there are spaces where, so the identities that matter the most to me are definitely like Asian and being Asian American and being queer. But and so I happen to have a therapist who is also queer and Asian American, but also the one identity that I have that she doesn't, that really, really has been affecting me like this past year is um like I like just like the or like I oh my god, I cannot speak. So I'm a recent immigrant and she doesn't hold that identity, and so like a lot of times it feels like it just doesn't, that dialogue is just never really natural, and it feels in a certain way like you're kind of restrained from talking about it, even though she's my therapist. So yeah, that makes sense. And it's just so all of them are just so like twined and like tied together that like it's weird not talking about it. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I see it from how y'all just from hearing how y'all talked about it. Yeah, that is kind of a nice segue to our next question. Like, what are some like real world implications from this proximal stress and minority stress in general, I guess?
I think I think this kind of stress perpetuates brokenness. No one will ever feel because we kind of close ourselves off, and so we're all unique. We all have different identities. There's never going to be one person that completely understands you. But generally speaking, because at least for example, living in America, you don't always try to find someone who can relate to you in those different identities because it's hard. It's frankly quite hard in America, but it essentially creates a lot of brokenness, and so each person is kind of broken in their own way. And I guess the real question we should be answering is how do we fix that brokenness? Like how do we bring our culture back together? Because it's impossible to find, like it's impossible for me to just live in a country that's just filled with mixed Taiwanese Americans. So it's more of like how can you learn to accept your identity and like compromise, because you can't find someone who will understand you exactly for who you are.
I guess to like rewind that a little bit, I'm thinking of more of like the direct implications that like those minority stressors will cause, I guess. So like for me, it's that I bottle everything up. Like I don't talk to people about like my life. Like people are always like, oh, Jane's always like super happy and bubbly, but they never actually know like what's going on in a sense. And like I the easiest way to put it, like for me as a multiracial American, like I constantly feel alone, if that makes sense. Like there's like you said, Sam, like I'm not gonna find some country with a bunch of mixed Japanese Americans. And like I live in the middle of I live in the buff fuck middle of nowhere, okay? There's not even a lot of like these people around me or like Asian people around me. And like to say that I will find within that like a even more smaller population of like the mixed Japanese people or the mixed Asian people is very rare. And like even then, like they still have a different experience than me because like some people may have grown up in Japan and some people may have grown up in the US, but like I was raised in both countries. And so like I have a very unique perspective from that as well. And like these different implications for me like has made me feel like I am alone and I will always be alone. And like I think that like it puts a lot of stress on me. Like I think that I have like trust issues and stuff. And like it keeps building, if that makes sense. Like it's not just like where the minority stress begins, it's like everything builds on top of that. So like going back to what Sam said, I'm kind of like rambling in that a little bit. But going back to Sam said, like a little bit that I thought of was like maybe a way to fix it is empathy, like parents need to learn empathy and like be able to just like it's okay to not be able to understand. Like everyone walks in different shoes, but you have to try your best to understand and you have to try your best to sit by them and like hold their shoulder and cry with them kind of thing. Um was one thought I had, but also another thought is like microaggressions. I try to call them out when I hear them, but I'm also really bad at that. Or like sometimes like if you call them out a lot, like people get frustrated with you too. And it's like a difficult line to walk on, you know? That's yeah.
I honestly couldn't have put it better myself. I kind of, to reiterate what you're saying, like I resonate with what you're saying. Oftentimes I feel more alone, and I do have a lot of friends, and I do feel loved, but at the same time, like no one will ever understand me for who I am, and so I always feel like I will always be alone, you know, and I really resonate with that. And it's hard, like even though we're talking about like being lonely people, like even though like we have like friends and stuff, it's like it's kind of like that like existential dread where it's like, yeah, like I'm like the only person, you know. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I definitely resonate with that. I totally empathize with you.
Yeah. I think like now that you both kind of said that, like I kind of delve deeper, or like I pose a question to myself, like why is it so hard? Like because like no one, there's not a single um, person that is like the same as each other. Like there's no such thing as like the same experience. I think, or that is what I believe. So how come we minorities or intersectioning minorities are the one to feel so lonely? Like it's kind of distinct, almost somewhat distinctively just us. Um, like even though like everyone has a very different experience on this face of planet, and that's like everyone. And so I kind of thought like maybe it's because like not because we're like we are different, but like not because like how do I word this? Maybe it's because we have been invalidated. Um, we don't have that kind of same sense of trust as other quote unquote regular people do. Um, and so because of that, we just have trust issues and we start isolating ourselves and feeling alone, even though other people don't. And they still thrive and still enjoy their unique experience, if I'm making sense at all. Yeah. So maybe like to answer, or someone earlier posed this question, like what can people do to like help? Maybe like just like what you said, Jane, like just be more empathetic and be more understanding from the beginning, so we don't even have a trust issue to begin with. Is my answer to that. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. What are your thoughts? And let me know if you want me to clarify anything I said. I feel like that wasn't the best worded way.
No, I think the point that you made about like we tried to like talk about it and then like I forgot what word you said, like people don't understand, they shut it down kind of thing. That makes sense to me because like for me it was like growing up, I would talk about how like I would get bullied in school or whatever, right? And then my dad was like, "Oh, they think you're cute or whatever." In that sense, that is a patriarchal thing we're not going to talk about right now. But also like he just is like not empathizing. Like it's not about, oh, I'm so sorry that you're having this pain. It's about making jokes like, oh, it's because they think you're cute and like trying to like give me a solution in a sense to like be accepting of it. And I think that in itself is also inappropriate. Like I don't solve the problem. I don't want you to like move on from it. I want you to listen to what I have to say and understand what I have to say and try to understand what I'm going through, kind of thing. I don't know.
One comment I want to make about that, I, I think it's really important to know that like when you're dealing with these stressors, sometimes it's not always important about like how to how to get over it. Sometimes it's important to just stay in that moment of like I'm having this hard time. I want you to feel that I'm having this hard time instead of like I want you to cheer me up, because they're kind of two different things, you know. If I think not to plug Disney, but I think Inside Out did a really good job demonstrating that. So whenever you're feeling sad, sometimes it is good to stay in that moment of like feeling sad, because if you if you just try to brush over that, you never get over the fact of like you never experience that fully, you know. And I think it's important to, yeah, it's important to cry. It's important to like feel that stress. Not necessarily, so you shouldn't bask in it, but it's important to have someone else, like, to take someone else into your shoes and like bring them through that stress and let them experience it the way that you were experiencing it. And so like I've found in my personal life that the most meaningful connections that I've had with people when talking about a specific thing that has stressed me out is not necessarily them saying, oh, it's okay, like it'll be okay, but it's more like them saying like, I understand and I kind of want to like hear you talk about it, you know.
I don't know where to go from there, but I do agree with what Sam said. Also, Inside Out is a great movie. I love that movie. I am sadness and joy at the same time. It's a weird thing, you know?
Yeah, I don't really know how to segue, but like just kind of want to leave a comment that like um just hearing y'all's experience of like feeling shut off in like spaces where some people have some part of your identity and some people have the other part of your identity, like feeling shut off from those group. Yeah, just hearing your experience of your own minority stress, I can empathize with that, and I appreciate the narratives because they do make me feel like I'm less lonely in that sense. So thank you for that. Let's see.
There's something that I wanted to bring up that I mentioned earlier, but I don't think I mentioned it clearly. So in the reading that we had, there is a quote, and I'm going to read this quote. It says, within Asian cultures, attitudes towards the LGBTQ community have evolved from traditional permissive perspectives on same-sex relations and sexual fluidity to modern stigmatic views of non-heterosexual orientations as pathological, as influenced by Western colonial ideals and practices. And this is from a different source that was actually cited in this paper. But essentially what it's saying that within Asian communities in America, attitudes towards the LGBTQ community initially were very permissive on same-sex relations and sexual fluidity, but have since then been influenced by Western ideals and are now considered impermissive, and they view non-heterosexual orientations as pathological. I'm just kind of curious, like, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm stupid. Can you define permissive?
It just means it's okay. And so essentially, like, if I'm trying to summarize this,
It's that damn colonialism again, isn't it?
so it's essentially saying that I think at least from my interpretation, it's saying that when Asian Americans come or immigrate to the U.S., generally their views are very permissive on sexual fluidity, but over time, Western ideals kind of perpetrate that, and they kind of fall back on their views of same-sex marriage and sexual fluidity.
So before colonialism, they were more laxed about it, but after colonialism, they were more strict about it. Okay. You know, the damn colonialism.
I'm kind of curious if you. I guess that was more of like a fact. I'm kind of curious as to like your thoughts on that.
Makes me angry. Like it's just, yeah. I don't know. Like I just imagine what could have been. Like if colonialism didn't happen, I guess I wouldn't have moved here, but then I also would have a happier life in Vietnam. Um, Lots of could have been situation popped up in my head, but yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it because, like, obviously, it's I don't know. Like, it is very unfortunate that like before it wasn't a problem and now it is, like, because of colonialism. Like, that is an obvious problem. But I'm trying to think, like, I don't know. I'm thinking in a like a pros and cons way. So like I'm trying to see like were there benefits out of that, and probably not. I don't know. I'm like processing it. I don't know. I think of like Japanese culture, like my mom, and like the way they view like homosexuality, or like anyone that's like trans, and like just anyone out of the like the norm of like the straight cisgendered, like that type, and like it's almost viewed as like something entertaining in a sense. Like they want, I don't know, like they like I don't know, commodity. I don't know how to say the word. They like turn them into like a media commodity. And so like that is really problematic. And so I part of me wonders, like, if not for colonialism, would that not have happened, if that makes sense?
So I guess like the discussion that I brought about is not necessarily a good one, because it's essentially the focus is like, is there something that is good that can be taken from like microaggressions and like racism and stuff? Um, but I actually this may be a bit controversial, but I do think that like actually I, at least for in my experience, I think that um microaggressions that I have faced, or like bullying that I have faced when I was younger, obviously they're not okay. Um, and they're things that should not have happened. But I think they've kind of built me into the person I am. And they've kind of made me more aware of my identities. And so even though these things are, these events that took place were essentially designed to uh, make me forget about my identity, it kind of actually drew out my identity more. Because I think without racism, I wouldn't really have acknowledged my mixed uh, heritage, and so that's something that I just thought about that it was really interesting. And the same goes for mental health. Without the stigma against mental health, I wouldn't have become a stronger advocate for mental health. I wouldn't have really considered it as much. But there's also the flip side that those things are not okay, and they should not have ever occurred, you know?
Yeah, I'm thinking more on the flip side, because like I don't know if I can necessarily agree with that. Like I do think that what happened to me and like what I experienced growing up definitely made me into the person I used to be. A brat, a spoiled brat, y'all. But happened was not okay. Like I'm still traumatized by it. Like there's still a lot of problems that I'm left with, and a lot of like scars, emotional scars that I'm left with. And like I don't know, I went through this phase like in high school where like I hated who I was and I hated my identity, and I outright told my mom that I hated her because she gave birth to me and I was born with this identity, you know? Like that wasn't okay for me to do either. And like there were a lot of things that happened along those incidents that like I wish that didn't happen. And like I think back, and like if not for those microaggressions and those bullying incidents, like my life would not be where I am today. And like sometimes I wish that they didn't happen. So like for me, it's like I guess like maybe Sam is more on the healed side and like has is more like like retrospective of it, and like I'm still healing, but I don't know. My thought is like I wish they wouldn't have happened, and I wish that I don't know where to go from there. But yeah.
Yeah, what you both said completely makes sense. Like, um, sometimes like our struggles are just so hard that finding a meaning behind your struggles can be just so liberating to know that like your struggles aren't just for nothing. Um, but then I also see Jane's point in the sense that like or the way I relate to your experience, Jane, is that very recently, actually, I went through like a phase where I just hated everything about myself. And so even though before I was very empowered, so it's very, I navigate through like, oh, will these scars come and go again? And it's always an annoyance. It's always like hinders um, a lot of my daily life. Um, and so it's yeah, I don't know what point I'm trying to say, but it's yeah, I don't know. I can see both of your points.
So I guess going back to like the bigger question that we had that we kind of like danced around is, what is how can we uh, how can we resolve these issues? How do we prevent minority stress? And that's really the big issue that I think everyone is asking.
I don't know. I think I kind of go back to like empathy. Like part of me wonder, I think it's more of like the way I look at this like mental the minority stressor theory is like it has to have both the proximal and the distal stressor to lead to the mental health. Like you don't have just a proximal or just a distal. So then like the simple perspective for me is like if growing up, like if my parents were able to understand, if my parents were able to empathize with me, maybe I wouldn't have ended up with the mental health and the emotional like damage that I have now. Or like if the micro, like regardless of whether my parents can empathize or understand me or not, if the microaggressions hadn't happened, maybe I wouldn't be where I'm at now. So then I'm thinking like the easier question is me, or I don't know. Obviously, like people have been fighting racism for like centuries now, and like it's not going away anytime soon. So like more of like a instantaneous like right now thing for me is like I wish my parents had empathized more with me, and like maybe empathy is the answer of like that simple like just sitting there and like trying to like understand how I'm feeling and trying to understand what I'm going through would have been nice kind of thing. I don't know.
One thing to I guess it's kind of related. But one thing that I wanted to say is something that I've actively been trying to do is I know that like because I've also experienced strife with my parents, and I'm not entirely necessarily okay with it. But I can't change anything about what has happened, but I can change what I do in the future. And I have three other siblings. Two of them are older and one of them is younger. And one thing I've been trying to do recently is to be more open with my siblings, because I know they have experienced very similar things that I have with regards to parents because we grew up in the same household. And so I think like this is one of those things, and I guess it's kind of hard to relate if you're an only child or if you don't have any siblings that are close by. But um, I don't want my siblings to experience the same things that I did, and I want to be open with them so they can be open with me. And so one thing that I've been trying, especially with my younger brother, is I've been trying to be more open with him about my mental health, my sexual health, and just like how I feel regarding my identities in general. And so that's one thing that I've found has been particularly helpful, not necessarily for me, but for other people who are either influenced by me or maybe I'm even influenced by them.
I totally get that. I have like a little brother who's like 7 years younger than me, and like he's literally my best friend. And like, I mean, he's the cutest little
Masu.
but like I don't know, like I totally get that. Like I don't want him to experience the same thing as me. And I think that I don't know, in a sense, living in a patriarchal society, he has more of an advantage than I do. But like, and so he doesn't seem to have experienced the same things that I have. And like, I don't know, I try to protect him so much, but like there's only so much we can do. And like at the end of the day, like I really hope that I'm able to be there for him and like he'll like if not like I hope that I'm the one that he calls if something happens, but like if it's not, I hope he's able to find someone like that is able to understand, I guess.
I relate to what y'all say. I also have a younger sister. She's in Vietnam, but she is most likely going to immigrate here soon, and she's probably going to be going a lot of similar things that I'm going through. And since she is, she's a female, there will be disadvantages that I will never understand. And so I worry in that aspect. I worry about the stress that she will have, the minority stress that she will probably have to go through. And yeah, I, I, I can do my best to try to be there for her, but um, at the end of the day, it's, I don't know. I don't want to be pessimistic, but like at the end of the day, there will be moments where she feels lonely before she can reach out to me. I don't know. Maybe that's how I see it. But yeah, I can provide space and support if she needs it or when she's ready to reach out. But yeah. Yeah. Actually, that does like makes me like wonder, like to what extent would y'all like go out of your way to keep them always in a bubble and protect them, and then like once you're not able to be there just for a second to protect them, and then boom, their bubble burst. Like that's like kind of one of my concern. Like how do you kind of navigate this whole thing? Like do you protect them in a bubble or help foster some sort of strength in them by letting them deal with some of these things?
So I just want to say, with regards to my younger brother, I don't necessarily keep him in a bubble per se. It's more of like I let him experience the things that he experiences, and then I can talk with him about some of those things as he experiences them. Because I guess like so obviously I do want to shield him from everything. The world is a cruel and terrible place, filled with racism and sexism. But at the same time, I am one person. He is also one person. I cannot like perfectly shield him from the entire world. And so I think an important part of it is not necessarily preventing him from experiencing those things, but just being there for him when he does experience those things. And I say when, not if, because it's sad to say that those things will happen. You know, like you will experience microaggressions, you will feel racism or feel, you know, sexism.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, so I used to be a helicopter parent on my brother. Like literally we would ride the school bus and like they'd like section it off with like elementary, middle school, and high school. And I was like in high school, he was in elementary school, and I made him sit in the high school section next to me and like shielded him away from everyone. I was like, no one could talk to him, no one could touch him. But obviously I can't do that like everywhere in any place. And like even now that I've moved out for college, like we don't even live in the same house. Like he lives 3 hours away from me. And so thinking about like those circumstances for me, like, I don't know, what I do is like I try to talk to him when I can. I'm really busy, so I don't get to talk to him as much as I want to, but like I try to talk to him when I can, like ask him how his day's going or like tell him about my day or like when he's talking about stuff, like sometimes like he'll tell stories about like kids saying those microaggressions and like he's still in middle school, he doesn't understand that's not okay, and like he doesn't seem to internalize it yet, but like he seems to look at it as like a joking matter, and I don't think that's okay either. So I usually call him out for it, and like I don't know, I usually try to explain to him like why that's not okay and like why like his friends shouldn't be doing that either, kind of thing. But like there's only so much like I can do but to like teach, like try to educate him with the small amounts of knowledge that I have, and also try to be here and like be that phone call to always pick up when he calls me kind of thing. It's like all I can think of.
Yeah. I just asked that because I think it's just interesting in trying to figure out like what's the best way to support people who go through minority stress. So that's really interesting. I do have like one more um, kind of term-ish to introduce, but before we move on, does anyone kind of have like a comment before we move on, I guess? Okay. So I want to introduce like these two terms, or I guess like the difference between these two terms, like homophobia and heterosexism. Uh, just because I think like I just found like I don't know, like I just researched it up like before this video, and it's very interesting. Words are power. The more words, the more terms you know, the more power you have, I guess. Um, so I guess like homophobia is more like fear or like over um, fear or like immediate hatred that someone expressed towards a queer person. Whereas heterosexism is more like systemic or systems in the background in our society operating to systematically put queer people down. Um, yeah, that's it. I just want to introduce those to our listeners. But yeah, if y'all have any comments or reactions to those two terms, feel free to go off.
I just realized we hella strayed from like what our topic was with like a PETA trans, a PETA queer, but that's okay. I think we still had a pretty productive discussion.
I just wanted to say, I think with regards to your comment, Kyle, I think it's interesting because one is a phobia or like a fear of, and the other one is more of like a discrimination or prejudice, which I guess they're both discrimination or prejudice, but they're kind of different at the same time. Yeah, and I just think it's interesting to see those two different sides of the same coin, kind of. I do want to say also, I think people are generally just afraid of things they don't understand. And this isn't necessarily specific to homophobia, but just to things in general. Um, Generally, we're afraid of the things that we can't understand, we can't comprehend. And because of that, we usually have a resentment towards those things. And so, I mean, I just think about like in history, um, even like during, say, for example, like the Cold War, where the US was perpetually afraid of Russia and the Soviet Union. And it wasn't because we were, I don't know, because they were better than us or we were better than them. It was just because we didn't understand each other. And there was kind of a wall between us. And so all sorts of media and literature came about as a result. And you could say this about anything, really. I mean, you could even say this about World War II with the Germans and the Jews. It's just being afraid of things that we don't understand, and because of that, you kind of you create a barrier yourself if there wasn't a barrier already. And so specifically with regards to homophobia, a lot of people don't understand the identity. A lot of people don't understand the LGBTQ community, and because of that, there's kind of a fear of what it is. And so I guess this is kind of out of scope. But I was just thinking about like how can we remove that fear? How can we get people to understand like what it means? And I think part of it is just education. It's because people just don't understand like that not everyone feels the same way. Not everyone, has the same desires, the same identities.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Kind of bounce off of it. So like I'm thinking I brought it up in our last session. I'm taking like a women's and gender studies class about toxic masculinity. It's a great class. I love it. And like today we were talking about kind of like sex ed in high school of like you're basically taught about like the fear of sex, like the abstinence, whereas like the healthier choice would have been to be educated like how to practice safe sex and like how to use a condom or how to get access to birth control, and that birth control is not just a pill, kind of stuff like that. And like to bounce off of that also like more towards like that like the homosexual identity or like the sexual identity the gender identity and sexual identity aspect of it is like they should also teach that in sex ed because it is part of your sexual identity, or your sexual identity is your sexual identity and your gender identity, but like stuff like that. Yes. That was a thought that came to mind. So
Sorry, I know you both talk, but I'm head empty. I don't have comment. But yes, I appreciate you both sharing.
shaved his hair off and then he lost all his thought. I'm sorry, that was mean.
Oh, you're good. People have been telling me every time I make like a mistake, like, oh wow, you not only did you lose your hair, you also lost your mind. I'm like, okay, wow. But I don't know if y'all watch Avatar, but Aang is the wisest person in that show, so he didn't have his hair. So,
so cute.
Except when
Aang.
Haru's with Sokka. It's like Aang and Sokka are very formidable and they're very smart, but together they have one brain
so
cell.
dumb. That's true.